Alright, welcome to another video, and before we get started I'd like to take a quick minute to thank all the Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members whose names you see scrolling across the screen right now. They make this financially possible, and without you, I probably wouldn't be here making videos, so thank you. Alright, so today we're going to be taking a look at this airplane here. It's an Atomrc Dolphin. It's been around quite a while. This is not really going to be a review video or anything like that. Just kind of give you an overview of the one that I built and been flying recently. I picked this one up in Atomrc's fixed wing sale, which I believe is still going on actually. And if it is, I'll put a link to it below the video and share a coupon code that I have for them as well. That'll give you an additional $10 off. And they are affiliate links, so it's kind of how I pay for this stuff. But anyway, getting back to the airplane. Like I said, we're just going to kind of give a quick walk around and look at the airplane and some of the things that I did for this particular one that might make it unique from some of the other ones. And we'll end the video out with some flight footage. So starting at the front here, you can see I have this little pitot tube for an airspeed sensor. This is obviously the pointed foam nose. They do come with a little flat GoPro style nose as well. But I wanted to use the pointed nose here. It's kind of a little more streamlined and probably a little bit more aerodynamic. But there's a little camera cutout here for a camera, obviously. But I printed this little plastic piece to hold a pitot tube. There's a digital airspeed sensor in here, because we are running ArduPilot on it. We'll take a look at the flight controller in a bit once we get back there. But moving back, you can see I have walk snail in this one. This is the Pro camera on a 300-degree pan servo, and the V2 transmitter, and a Caddx branded Rush FPV Cherry antenna there. It's kind of one that I had. It's not my favorite, but they do work pretty well. A little bit better than the stock antennas, I think, so I just went ahead and mounted that one. And you can see the little USB-C port right here kind of poking through the foam. That's the one to access the storage on the transmitter. I just kind of wanted to keep it accessible there. Kind of the same idea I had mounting the transmitter here. This is a little printed tray, by the way. It just kind of cut out a piece of foam here, and it fits from the canopy up to the front nose section. And makes it a little bit easier to cut it out, and a place to mount that transmitter and keep it somewhat streamlined. Not terribly streamlined, but it's really good for efficient cooling. And you can see my bind button right there is accessible for updating firmware and things like that. I have been testing a lot of firmware stuff for Walk Snow lately, so I kind of make it a point to keep those accessible. It just makes my workflow much easier. So we'll remove the canopy here. And you can see my battery that I'm flying with is the Zod 4S 1P 5000 mAh 21700 pack. It works well. The 2C max continuous amp draw, or 10 amps, is enough for this airplane. This airplane is rather efficient, actually. It's more efficient than I thought it would be, in fact. And 10 amps is enough to get it moving about 60 miles an hour. But I find it cruises right along very happily at like about 40 miles an hour, 40, 42-ish in that range, at about 4.5 amps, which is kind of how I have it configured to cruise. So this battery is more than sufficient. If I ever do replace it, I'd probably make a pack of the Molly cell 45 amp cells, because you can throttle up and get a little bit of speed going, and it's a little bit more fun like that. But for now, this works. So before we get too far ahead, we'll take a look back into the nose, and I'm going to try to shine some light through the foam there, maybe. So maybe you can kind of make out some of the things in there. Like I said, looking up in the front, you can see there's a digital airspeed sensor right up in there. It's a little bit difficult to see it, but it's in there. And then you can kind of see the bottom of that pan servo right back in there. If my camera would focus, but it doesn't appear like it wants to. There we go. And as far as the little USB port, it is just kind of poked through the foam right up here. Sorry for my poor camera work. I'm trying to do all this where I can't see the screen too good. But yeah, the little USB board is poked through there, and I have these two M2 screws that are just kind of threaded down into the foam through the holes in the USB port, the board, and it just kind of keeps it pinned in place so that it doesn't move when you plug a cable in. Kind of a neat way to do it, I thought, and keeps it out of the way. Another thing I wanted to point out in this section, if you notice right in here, which again I'll try to shine some light through the foam to make that a little bit more visible. You can see I have this little spot cut out in the foam right there. If my flashlight would stay put. This little section right here, I kind of cut this little tunnel to let airflow through into the back of the fuselage. Because to balance the airplane with this battery in it, I do have to shove this battery right against the foam, right to the back of the compartment. And normally there's a square hole cut out under the battery, or kind of behind the battery. But the battery pretty much blocked it off with it shoved back against the foam like that. So I just cut a little channel out the side right there to let air flow around the back of the battery and get into the rear compartment where it exits. And the last thing that we can show in this section is, because the battery shoved so far back like that, I needed a place to get out to the front with the battery wires. So I just kind of made that little cutout with a little slot to push the wires up into it right there. And of course my battery lead just plugs into it right there. And I had to make a corresponding notch, a little cutout in the foam right there, so that it lets those battery cables run through when it's in place, when the canopy's in place. And one other thing I want to mention, with this printed tray for the walk-snail transmitter, I did have to shave down the front of this tab right here on the canopy so that it can tab under there, because this tray does sit a little bit lower than the foam that I cut out to make room for it. So I just kind of had to reshape that tab a little bit. There's plenty of material left on it, and it's gonna hold. So moving back, we'll remove the back canopy, hatch cover, whatever, and take a look in here. This is my Dragon Link antenna right here. This is a Dragon Link receiver. This is the full power 1 watt telemetry 915 megahertz Dragon Link. I'll try to move some of this forward a little bit so we get a little bit better lighting into this compartment. So yeah, this is the 915 megahertz Dragon Link receiver with 1 watt telemetry output. And you see I just have a telemetry cable going over to one of the UARTs on the flight controller there, and S-bus out to the flight controller. And this is just a little USB board for the Maytech flight controller. Just kind of mounted it onto the phone there with some double-sided tape. And a quick note, if you do it, see I kind of mounted mine flush with this little step in the fuselage. What I didn't realize is that there's this little ridge on the hatch. So you can see here I had to cut out a little notch for the corner of the USB board there, so that it fits in place. But it works. And moving back, you can see the flight controller is a Maytech H743W Lite flight controller running ArduPilot. And then you see my compass and airspeed sensor plugged in here. And speaking of compass, this is the Walksnail branded M10 GPS. The WS181, I believe, is the part number or model number. And I am utilizing the internal compass on it, and everything works well. And the capacitor back here is just the one that came with the Maytech flight controller. Servos are the plug-and-play servos in the elevons and both wings. I did get the plug-and-play kit. I wanted to try out one of these Maytech flight controllers, so I didn't get the RTH version that comes with the Atomrc F405 Navi flight controller, which I do run those in the Penguin and my Swordfish, and they work fine. They're pretty good flight controller. I have no complaints. I just wanted to try one of these, the H743s. I had never used one before. But like I said, I did get the plug-and-play, but you can see I'm running a different motor. This is a Zing E of, forget the size. It is a 2807 1800 kV. The stock motor was a Atomrc branded, what is this, 2306 1800 kV. So basically the same size. This one's a 2306 and I went with a 2207. I replaced it because one of the bearings went out in this motor after a few flights. But I really liked the power and efficiency. It seemed to be a pretty good balance, so I stayed kind of close to that. But on the initial flights, I noticed there was a vibration in this motor and prop that I couldn't get out. I balanced the propeller multiple times and tried, and there was just a vibration that wouldn't go away. I tried and tried and never could get it out. And after a handful of flights, I noticed the motor was getting louder and louder, and it turns out one of the bearings was bad in it. So rather than replace the bearing in the motor, I just swapped the whole motor out for this one. So I do like these Zing motors. I have one similar to this, different size and kV rating, but I have one similar to this on the Eagle that worked out well. So I tried one on here too, and I have no complaints. As far as mounting, you can see I do have these little spacers. If I remember right, these are 16mm nylon M3 spacers, and I have long screws going into the wood plate back in there that's glued to the fuselage. And I had this little X mount in my box of spare parts that I used to mount it, just to extend the motor back a little bit, and that's to help with center of gravity. Because like I said, even with the battery pushed all the way back in this compartment, I needed to extend the motor out to get it to balance to help. And if you look carefully, way back there in the back, I'm not sure if you can see it. Yeah, you can kind of see the bottom of it there. There's a shiny metal hexagon shaped piece of metal sitting back there. That is a 1 ounce weight that is pushed all the way back in this compartment against the firewall. So there's an additional 1 ounce of weight back here with the motor extended to get it to balance. Now, a lot of people will run the battery back in this compartment because that kind of sits it a little bit closer to the center of gravity. But if I move my battery all the way back into this compartment, then I had the opposite problem. Then it was tail heavy, and I would have had to end up adding some dead weight up here in the nose to balance it. So I just went with this right now. I considered going to a larger, heavier motor back here instead of these smaller ones, because these are some relatively small motors for this airplane, but they do put out a lot of power and you get plenty of speed. Like I said, I'd pulling at 60% throttle at about 10 amps sustain, 10 or 11 amps. It'll sit on right at 60 miles an hour all day. And if you go ahead and run the throttle up and ignore the 2C rating on this battery and go ahead and just push it full power at 100% throttle, in level flight with no tailwind or anything, it'll sit right on 80. It kind of bounces around between 79 and 80 miles an hour. But like I said, I'm happy just cruising around, 40, 45 miles an hour with it until I'm bored. I've actually not ran this battery all the way down yet. I fly until I get bored, and then I land with about half the battery left. Was I'm averaging on these flights, like I said, not really doing efficient cruising, just flying around. I end up averaging right around 100 milliamp hours per mile, right around between the 100-105 milliamp hours per mile range. So pretty happy with that. And before anyone asks, or in case anyone asks, the yellow coloring on here, this is just something I did just to kind of personalize it a little bit, add a little bit of color. That is just simply packing tape, colored packing tape. That's pretty common on the foam board bills and things like that. I find it works well to add color to a model like this, so I just kind of carefully laid out some strips of it and trimmed it with a hobby knife, and that's what it looks like. I like it. It works well, I think. So anyway, that's my build. Nothing too exciting or groundbreaking or anything like that, but it's just a good basic clean build, and we'll get on to some flight footage and talk about some of the issues that I did have with it and how I eventually solved them. So let's get on with that now. Alright, so for this part of the video, I'm going to put some flight footage in the background from some of my most recent flights as I kind of explain things and talk over it. But like I said, these are from some of the most recent flights. Some of the earlier flights were kind of boring, just kind of taking off and doing like calibrations and tuning and things like that. We do calibrate the airspeed sensor and fine-tune the compass using the MagFit utility in Mavic Explorer, as well as set some cruise throttle and target airspeeds and things like that before we did the auto-tune. Then we did an auto-tune, and pretty basic stuff, what you would expect. And after the auto-tune was done, we did the TECS parameters as far as like minimum and maximum sync rate and max climb rate and things like that at the set throttle limits, which like I said earlier in the video, I limited that to 60% throttle, which was enough to maintain airspeed in the climb at a pretty decent climb rate actually, and keep the battery happy. On a good fresh charged battery, it's a little above 10 amps, but towards the end of the flight it limits it to about 10 amps. And it's a pretty good number to keep from stressing that battery and Like I said, it's pretty good speed. It'll push about 60 miles an hour and hold a good climb as well. So that's where I have my throttle limited. But yeah, some of the issues that I said I ran into as far as tuning. After I did all the auto tuning and everything, the airplane flew fine, navigated well, but it always had, I guess the best way to explain it was kind of like a nervous feeling to the airplane. It was always kind of twitchy and jittery, and any kind of little bumps in the air really upset the airplane, and it was kind of bouncing around, always trying to fight those. And it honestly, it felt like you were flying like in really high gusty winds, even on relatively calm days. Now, I did do a couple of flights in really just dead calm, still air after sunset on a good still day, calm day. And in those conditions, it flew fine. It flew really smooth, just silky smooth. But anything less than perfect, it tended to have a hard time dealing with it. Anyway, it seemed like it was always kind of fighting itself. And I poured over some logs and kept flying, logging things, and I really just couldn't figure it out. It's like you'd just be flying along, and it was all bumpy and bouncing around pretty crazy. And every now and then I'd notice these little twitches on the roll axis, and then I noticed a couple of times the pan servo even twitched around. So we dug around through the logs. I had one of my Urdu pilot friends that's well versed in Urdu pilot and more educated with this stuff than I am. He looked through some of the logs too, and he said nothing really stood out to him as far as the tuning and things like that. Apart from the controls, the elevons seemed to be kind of sensitive, and what he meant by that was the small outputs to the servos were resulting in large attitude changes, and that suggested that the control surfaces were probably too sensitive. The throws were too high. But getting back to the glitches thing that I kind of noticed and pointed out, or that we were able to point out in the logs, I actually was able to record one. I caught it on the pan servo when I was doing just these little short, purposeful flights. I would just kind of take off and do some hands-off flying, looking for the glitches in the radio system. And I was able to log those. And in the process of eliminating things, I pulled out the Dragon Link receiver that I showed earlier in the video, and it's back in now. That's what I'm flying with now. But I pulled it out at one point and put in a Express LRS receiver that I've recently picked up that I just wanted to play around with it. We're not really sure what I'm going to do with it yet. It's a Super D Diversity 915 megahertz receiver. I went ahead and put that in kind of temporarily, and I flew with it, and all the radio glitches were gone. So I left that receiver in it, and I flew a couple of times. And I wanted to address the issue that Henry, which is the guy that was looking through the logs and helping me out. He goes by ATX Heli here on YouTube and the forums. You probably know him. But he pointed out that the elevons seemed to be a bit too sensitive. So what I did, I ended up moving the control linkages all the way into the third hole out from the servo. Starting at the center, you count, the third hole out from the center is the one I'm using now. And that reduced the rates enough that it was easier to tune. And he gave me some other tips too as far as the tuning and stuff like that. But with the elevon linkages moved all the way in to the third hole, I still have plenty of control authority in manual mode for loops and rolls. And I'll probably try to stick some of that in to the background flight now from one of the previous flights. This is what the manual roll and pitch controls look like. But by moving those linkages back in, I got a little bit more resolution and kind of slower response on the control surfaces, which made it a little bit easier to tune. And auto-tune was able to do a better job also. And another suggestion he made, that he felt that this airplane would do better on an auto-tune level of 7. Well, he suggested 7 to 8. And I set it to 7 and I auto-tuned with that. And it actually flew really well at that point. And then I went in. It's something I like to do on some of my airplanes. It's probably just personal preference, but a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times I find they feel better to me after an auto-tune. If I go back and reduce the P gains a little bit, it just kind of relaxes the airplane and smooths things out a little bit. And so I did that on this one. I ran the auto-tune and then I reduced the P rates. And Henry had suggested that I maybe increase the D gain as well to help with some of those little bumps in the rough air. So I did that, and it started to get a little bit of oscillation back in the tune. Like it was tuned a little bit too aggressive, too tight. So I ended up going back and reducing some of the D gain as well as the P gain, and it flies the way you see here. It flies really good, in fact, and it feels like a completely different airplane now, and it's much more fun to fly. And it still has plenty of control authority in auto and manual modes, and it handles really well, holds altitude good. And speaking of holding altitude, that's another thing that I found a little bit different on this airplane. Typically you need to set up some nose up attitude, pitch up, for your cruise and fly-by-wire, so that they hold altitude while flying at a cruise throttle. You know, most airplanes typically fly with a few degrees of nose up attitude. I usually start around 5 or 6 degrees of nose up, which will get you pretty close, and then I'll fine tune it from there. But to start with, this one was climbing pretty good bit at a pretty good rate in fly-by-wire at center stick. With I think I started at 6 degrees or maybe 5. I really don't remember. But whatever it was too much. It was cruising along. It was gaining altitude at a pretty good rate. But I slowly backed that down, and even once I got down to like 2 degrees of pitch up, it was still climbing. And I ended up, to finally get that climb out in fly-by-wire, I had to take all of that nose up altitude. It's basically my trim pitch CD command or parameter is at 0. So when I leveled the board, when I did the board level and everything, I leveled this one sitting on the little skids on the airframe, and that's kind of where it flies at nose up attitude. So it's pretty good. It's pretty unique in that respect. It doesn't need any pitch up, and the airplane really doesn't seem to have a lot of pitch up nose attitude built into it, the way it sits on the ground or anything. So I was expecting to need to set some up, but that wasn't the case. But anyway, what you see here is the end result. Like I said, it flies really good. It's really smooth. And in most of the flying here, you kind of notice there's light and variable winds. It's not really any high winds, but it's that variable wind. We had some thermals earlier in the day, and a little bit of weather moved in later in the afternoon here when I was flying. This was actually kind of a flew between 2 rainstorms. Well, not heavy rain, but we had a little wave of rain move through. Then it quit raining, and I flew for a while right at sunset here, and then it rained again later that night. But the air wasn't particularly smooth. It was a little bit bumpy, and if you watch close, you can kind of see those little bumps, but it's just doing a really good job of stabilizing those and countering them, which is exactly what I wanted. And I will point out that you might notice some jello in the video a couple of times here. Because during these flights, when I was balancing the propeller previously, trying to get the vibration out, I had used a little piece of tape to balance the propeller, and during one of these flights here, the piece of tape was thrown off and I lost it. And so it kind of developed a little bit of vibration, which I have fixed that now. So that should be corrected in future flights. But I just wanted to point out that's what that was. We did have a little bit of vibration going on, but it didn't really seem to affect anything other than one specific throttle range. You'd see a little bit of vibration jello in the video. But other than that, it's just a really fun plane to fly. Like I said, I spent most of this battery just cruising around down low and flying like a little jet fighter that it looks like. At least that's kind of the way it feels when I fly it. That's what I think about. But we're cruising around down here, and it's actually so quiet. It's surprisingly quiet to be a pusher like this with the prop mounted relatively close to the tail. In fact, when I'm flying along here, you might have already noticed by now, there was a little family of deer. The first time I noticed there was 1 deer, and then I passed later, there was 2, and then eventually there was 3. They were just kind of hanging out in the back of the field back here, and I kept making low passes by on looking. Because usually when I see the deer out here, you'll catch a glimpse of them running back off into the woods. Like the airplanes tend to spook them. They're afraid of them. And you'll see them running out of the field back to the woods, and that's the end of it. They don't come back out. But they didn't seem to be bothered by it. Actually made some low passes down pretty close. And they just kind of hung around, did their thing, and didn't seem to mind. So I don't know if that's just something unique about this plane, or just because it's so quiet, or what the deal is, but I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, like I said, everything's flying really good. It's really fun plane to fly. It's pretty efficient for what it is. Handles really good. I like the way it looks. I don't really have anything to complain about. So hopefully this video has been somewhat informative and enjoyable. It's my experience so far with the Dolphin. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet that I was going to point out earlier in the video and I forgot is the wing roots. I did tape them. The wings are removable with little thumb screws, or quickly just unplug the servo and take one screw out and the wing will slide off. But the trailing edge section of the wing between the elevon and where it meets the fuselage at the root, it's a little bit thin and flexible. And earlier I was wondering if that was maybe attributing to the way the airplane was flying, all bumpy and kind of didn't feel right. Ended up taping the wing roots to keep that all a little bit more firm and sturdy. But it didn't really seem to affect anything, but I don't see any reason to remove the wings any kind of regularly or anything, so I went ahead and left those taped. But other than that, that's what I have. It's been pretty enjoyable, and hopefully the video's been enjoyable, and we'll get some more flying in the future. Maybe do some more narrated flying here soon. Kind of miss doing that. Lately, a lot of the flying I've been has just been more purposeful, utilitarian type stuff, you know, tested firmware and tuning airplanes, and I tend to not narrate those as much and have to record all this narration voiceover later. But hopefully things will calm down a little bit on all that front, and we'll just start doing some more narrated flying for fun here pretty soon. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that, and questions, comments, put them below the video, and I'll try to answer them when I can. So thank you for watching this video, and keep an eye out for some more to come in the hopefully near future. So I'll see you all then.